You were raised to believe that all Christian people are good people.
Yeah.
Open up, you open up.
Hi guys, I'm Hannah.
I'm Sadie.
And we're not straight.
Welcome back or welcome to our channel.
If you like watching our videos, if you're a big fan, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It helps us out a ton.
Yeah. Before we get started, we want to give a Patreon thank you shout out to Catherine R.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your support.
New patron.
Yeah.
Awesome.
If you don't know, we have a Patreon. You can find the link in the description below and join us for fun extras like conversations, book club, dog photos and videos, and the occasional old video of Hannah singing.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yes, check it out. For this week, we have the part 3 of our series on religion, more specifically Christianity.
Yeah.
And our experience with it, or lack thereof.
Yeah. So part of why we wanted to talk about this was just because we realized that we have had so many kind of like differences in understanding of reality and our life experiences as a result of having different relationships to religion in our upbringings.
Yes.
And so we wanted to share some of the like discrepancies that we have had, not necessarily conflict, really, but
that have led to like very specific conversations that we realize are a result of these
very
differences.
influenced, yeah, by that. I think the biggest one, and maybe the most taboo one for me, has always been talking about sex.
Yeah.
I think I was raised in an environment, like a religious environment, where sex was something that was so intimate and so secret and so private that you just didn't talk about it with anyone except for your spouse. But there was this like kind of weird posturing around it too, like, oh, get married so you can have sex. And
so weird.
And that always felt so strange to me. It felt like a very like hard clash of kind of like taboo, like you don't talk about it, but then we also kind of like wink wink nod nod like about sex in general, but we can't talk about the details of it or when we struggle with it or what we like or don't like.
Yeah, and there also it's like a close relative of shame too somehow.
Yes.
And maybe that's why it feels like such a clash to you. Like, because if you're not talking about it and you're not supposed to talk about it and it's all hush hush, it seems very shameful to do it or to think about it or to talk about it.
Yeah.
So then when that's your reality, and there are also these other instances where people are like, I love having sex with my wife because we're married and we can, and it's okay then. It's like, it still feels kind of gross even then.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other part of not talking about sex was I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I think it is a very well-known fact that there has long been a lot of scandal around the secrecy of sex and pedophilia in the church, and something that has been like a really dark aspect of the Catholic religion, being priests abusing their power and their relationships with young people in the church. So I think that it's so interesting because I think that for me it was so taboo, but the taboo nature of it led to all of this secrecy and like lies, and like created a space where you never talk about it, but because there was no conversation about it, it was something that was like almost facilitated by the taboo nature of it. And I think that is so, like, upon stepping back and reflecting on it, it's so harmful. It's so damaging. And I know that that's not the case everywhere and it's not everyone, but it's happened so many times.
Yeah, and it's part of, like, we've talked about this in our sex series a little bit. Go back and watch that if you haven't. But the less you talk about sex, the harder it is for a victim of a scandal like that to feel comfortable and empowered.
Yes.
Sharing about their experience. So I think a lot of it could be prevented if there were more open conversation about it.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah, and if people were not just like talking about scandals, but talking about your own sexual experience and your own sexual identity, and like what you want out of a sexual experience if you want to have one. getting to know what you like and don't like so that you can be empowered to say yes or no in certain situations.
Yeah.
And know that that is right for you.
I was going to say, I think a big piece of that is deferral to someone who you interpret to know more about the topic.
Yep.
Which, when there's a power imbalance, is always the case.
Yep.
So if there's someone who's younger or like the victim, essentially, and if they're not educated about any of this, why would they feel like they could speak up against someone who clearly knows what they're doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that gives me the chills.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking that we were really going to dive into that, but it's so important.
Apparently I have feelings about it that I needed to share.
Yeah, no, it needs to be talked about.
Yeah, so I think that is like the big one. And then just on a more personal level, it has been a real struggle for me to articulate what sex is to me and why, what I want, what I need, how I imagine a sexual relationship or a partner to be. Mm-hmm. It is really hard to like come up with those ideas because I don't have any context for what that sounds like. Mm-hmm. So it has been like a long and really, I don't know, enlightening but challenging conversation between the two of us to figure out what that is. And
yeah, and somehow I think bringing us into our next topic, tied up in that is like internalized homophobia. Yeah, to just say it plainly. That is thanks to your Catholic upbringing, probably.
For sure. I think I learned at a very young age that being gay was wrong, and it's hard work to undo that. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that that's true, but when that is something that is embedded in the culture or the environment that you grow up in, it is really hard to untangle your own identity from what you learned.
Yes. And I even have some of that. Mm-hmm. It's not just like a religious thing. I know that. I know that it's a bigger societal issue than that. Right. But that has come up, if we want to talk about like specific times, it's come up in like weird ways, like wanting to post a picture of us kissing on Instagram, for example. I think was maybe the first time that we had that conversation.
Yeah. Nope. You can come up here if you want. You can lay down. Good girl. Good girl. Can you settle?
Yeah, it sometimes feels like you have a very like instinctual reaction to something that I like don't necessarily see coming because I'm not coming from the same frame of mind, and then it like hits us hard, and suddenly we're in the middle of a very like heated conversation over something that is seemingly small. Or that I, like, believed to be small, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's these conversations where it's, like, the wall of my perspective is, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm saying, like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
It's just, that's not something you're supposed to do. And I think that those moments are hard for me to recognize. It's hard for me to recognize when I'm saying something because I've been taught that's what you say instead of that's what I believe. But I do think that it's so much more important to be intentional and to like reflect on those moments instead of just going with it and being like, well, no, I don't care. We're not going to post that picture, or we're not going to do this thing, or we're not going to tell this person that we're together or whatever.
And I think I can always feel it. Like, I think they always catch me off guard so much because I don't see them coming somehow. And so if it's a little thing, but you have a strong response, I feel like now I know that that's probably why. And then I always ask, I'm like, can you explain, or can we talk about it? Or like, is there a reason? And I think similarly, it was like coming out on Facebook or
coming out publicly, like,
or in your hometown. Yeah. Too.
We didn't tell people for a long time that we had this channel. This was like a fun thing that we were doing to document our relationship and to celebrate it because we had so much kind of negative to neutral energy around us. And I think that we wanted a space to be positive, to be like, yeah, we're stoked to be together. And this is exciting. We want to celebrate it. I was worried that sharing this would bring negative feedback to us. Yeah. So I didn't want to share it. And so it was really scary to me to think we can, and this is how I came out to everyone that I No.
This channel. She means like sharing one of these videos. Yeah.
So I shared one of our videos and just posted it on my personal Facebook and said, this is a project we've been working on and this is who I'm dating and I'm gay. And the response was extremely positive from the people that commented and responded online. I think that there was so much inertia kind of like to just stay largely in the closet, even though we were out online publicly to whoever wanted to search our YouTube channel. Yeah. Because it felt like there was a level of anonymity here.
Yeah. But then suddenly we like removed that element. Yeah. That was like a tough series of conversations and it took us months, I think, to get there.
Yeah. And I think ultimately I learned that being gay is wrong, growing up. And that if you are gay, there are people who will accept you, but you have to be quiet about it. That you have to be like, don't shove it in people's faces. I think that for my own sake, I wanted to follow along with that because I didn't want the negative reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't raised that way. So it was all kind of like confusing to me. And I couldn't tell if it was like other people that we were worried about or if it was like ourselves feeling shameful that we were worried about.
Yeah.
And maybe that kind of, do you have another thing to say?
I was just going to say, I think that those two feed into each other. I felt very vulnerable to the reactions of other people because I was realizing that my beliefs were so tied up in other people's perspective already. So by untying my beliefs from like what I had learned growing up, I was like leaving myself open to new negativity hurt. Or like new hurt. Yeah. And that seemed really hard.
Which is so funny because I think that actually kind of goes against what our next topic was going to be, which is that you were raised to believe that all Christian people are good people.
Yeah.
And that people who are, like, implied, people who are not Christian are not necessarily unless they, like, prove themselves to be so.
Yeah. I think I was raised to believe that, yes, by default, Christians are good unless they are bad Christians. And that other people aren't by default good. They can be, but they're not necessarily.
And I think, honestly, you said this to me today, and I thought about this for the first time today, consciously. I think I was raised oppositely.
Yeah.
I think I was raised to understand that people who were deeply religious were inherently bad people.
So interesting.
Like, and I guess mostly, like, people who were deeply Christian or Catholic. And that the people I knew who were, like, good Christians or good Catholics were the exception. Like, that label of being a good Christian or a good Catholic, I thought was, like, to pull them apart from, like, the rest of the organization.
Can I say one clarifying thing? This isn't something that I was taught, like, explicitly. Like, my parents didn't sit me down and say, like, Christians are good people and everyone else is bad. But it was like the reaction to people. Like, if someone was a Christian and you knew that, you were like, oh, well, he's a good person. Even if he did that bad thing, like, well, he's trying. But if someone who's not a Christian does a bad thing, you're like, well, he's just a bad guy.
And I don't think that I was explicitly taught that either. I don't think that someone sat me down, but those were the impressions I had. And that felt very much in line with this thought that all Christian people were, like, judge people who are of the LGBTQ community, and the Catholic Church is full of sex scandals. Like, there was so much bad surrounding it that
it's so interesting.
I felt like Sadie, like, made it out a good person in spite of her, like, religious upbringing. Like, that was my whole perspective, which is why it's such a hard clash when we hit these problems because it's so polar opposite where we're coming
from totally opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
That is related to the last thing that I was going to say, which is one of the things that I have a really hard time with now is having, like, a holistic perspective on my experience and not having this sort of, like, nostalgic soft spot for Christianity and Catholicism. And thinking, like, oh, well, it's trying. Like, it's doing its best, you know.
Like,
as if it's, like, a static thing. Yeah. I think I still have a really hard time with the idea that some of the experiences that I had were damaging. Like, they were negative. I should not have learned that from the Catholic Church, that people who are gay can be gay as long as they don't act on it. Mm-hmm. That was a damaging thing that I learned. And I have a hard time totally rejecting it still, because it was something that I grew up with, and it was something that I was taught was love and was kindness and was, you know, charity, and all of these things that I was taught are good. And it is so hard to reject that thought completely, because it's in this institution, it's in this religion that I was steeped in.
I think even now talking about it is hard.
Yeah.
I think like finding the words sometimes seems hard, because like you're hesitant to say anything that's too damning or too...
Yeah, that's true. I think that a lot of people who have relationships with like family members or organizations or belief systems that are both, that they're taught are like good, but then are damaging. I think a lot of people have this experience too, mm-hmm. that they have a hard time like turning away from it. Mm-hmm. If you guys have grown up religious like me and have discovered things that you maybe that are obvious now, or that that were like maybe a little bit more nuanced, that you didn't realize were so rooted in religion, that you had kind mm-hmm. of like stuck, like talking about sex or mm-hmm. Thinking that Christians are good people, right? Like I did. I would mm-hmm. love to hear them, because I feel like this is something that feels kind of isolating. It feels like kind of lonely when I'm having a conversation with Hannah and I'm kind of like,
and you realize that I don't understand where you're coming from.
It's so interesting. So if you guys have similar experiences, I would love to hear them in the comments.
Yeah, or other times where that has come up, especially if it's in like conversation with a significant other or a loved one. Okay, our dog is going to rip the house up, so we're going to end this video right now, but we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.